I was asked to do a video on evil, so I guess the best place to start is by defining it. I think most viewers have at least a rudimentary grasp of what it is, but it helps to define it. It seems that evil is somewhat of an abstract idea because things that we may consider evil are not universal, and it's a quality that we apply to something, typically actions. Or we can think of the even more abstract idea of evil as some kind of intangible power. Evil, to my perception, just doesn't exist. At least not outside of our belief systems. Unlike the self, which exists, which is regardless of our belief systems, evil is something that, again, it's something that we apply to something else. We can take examples of evil acts. Historically, a lot of people might refer to the Holocaust as a great act of evil. Whether or not you argue that a certain act is evil or not, it doesn't change the fact of its happening, of its manifestation. Although beliefs and thoughts that we attach to certain things and actions can dramatically alter our perception of them. Evil is, you could argue, a rather extreme form of bad, at least in certain lights. Unless we're talking about the more abstract definition in which there's some kind of permeating power that is coming from somewhere, who knows, maybe a godlike figure, such as Satan, for instance. I don't believe in Satan, and I don't believe in evil, so I don't give it much thought. And I think that's an important takeaway, because the more we think about certain ideas and give them reality, then that's the reality that is put in front of us. Sometimes these beliefs can be rooted in our own past. Children who are raised in very religious, hyper-religious families who may have been taught by their parents that there is hell and there is Satan and a place of eternal torment and such. That may be a belief that they struggle to grow out of. So beliefs can have a powerful effect on our perception, certainly. I think it's important to evaluate our own belief systems because I think a certain amount of housekeeping is necessary to keep the psyche and the identity in a relatively stable and happy place. And if there are beliefs in evil that are floating around inside us, it might be useful for us to take a look at those and analyze them and question them to see if they actually do have any reality. Because these beliefs can have, again, they can have powerful effects on our perception. I used to experience something called hypnagogic and hypnopompic hallucinations, which is relatively common. It's not extremely common, but it's relatively common. And that's when this occurs during sleep paralysis, which is something that naturally occurs during sleep. So when the body is it typically occurs when you're lying on your back. So when a person falls asleep, the body naturally it paralyzes itself in order to. Some think that it's a protective mechanism so that we're not thrashing around in our sleep and potentially harming ourselves. But this occurs when the consciousness is, when you're still awake, but the paralysis is still active. And so for a lot of people, it can be a very disconcerting experience and can be pretty terrifying sometimes. What is fairly common during these experiences is for people to experience like entities in the room, and oftentimes they are interpreted as evil. What's very common, it wasn't common for me at all, but for individuals to experience like a demon sitting on their chest, apparently that's a fairly common manifestation. It wasn't so common for me. But in my experience, these experiences tended to occur during periods of my life that were out of balance. And they actually occurred so frequently that I began to almost experiment. I was able to figure out what variables did what, and a number of things could alter the occurrences. So sleeping on your back is one thing. If you're drinking alcohol, if you're depressed, if you nap during the day. And a lot of these are actually identified in scientific literature that, psychologists have done, various studies on it. I'm not sure there's psychologists, but anyway, researchers, I'll say. And they have identified that these certain variables influence the impact. Anyway, I wanted to introduce that as a supplementary topic to the idea of evil. But this no longer happens to me. And it took me a while to realize that these apparitions and entities, these demons, these were really just my beliefs reaching out to me, almost literally. And one example in particular, this is many years ago, I was lying down in my bed, and I was awake but also paralyzed, and I had the feeling that my feet were tethered, and I was being dragged off the bed by something, some kind of evil entity. Very frightening, as you can imagine. And much, much later, a very similar instance of this occurred. Only the perception was different. The state of awareness was much different. So, while being tethered by my feet, instead of being dragged off the bed by some demon or something, what happened was that experience precipitated an out-of-body experience. And that happened to be a rather positive one for the most part, very eye-opening. And so after that experience, I began to reconsider my perceptions of these, what were in my past, demons and apparitions in the room around me. I began to reconsider all of these perceptions. And beliefs and state of mind certainly make a difference. I had another experience many years ago in which I was visited by a dead person. And I don't mean dead as in, this was during a dream. It was a rather vivid dream. And by dead, I don't mean simply someone who died in my past and then I had the perception of being visited by them. But it was a corpse, essentially. And while that might seem frightening, like a frightening experience, the perception was quite different. I was communicating with this person, with this corpse, and they were actually very funny, interestingly. And that was actually an important dream because this being told me something that I needed to know. And it was something about It was something about my life. So there was a transmission of knowledge of some kind that needed to occur in order for me to make any progress. So does evil exist? Like many things, it exists if you believe it does. I don't particularly like the idea of evil or being confronted by things that I would regard as evil. While it's difficult to control our beliefs, we do have a limited degree of control. And that is by analyzing and examining our beliefs and deciding for ourselves what is reasonable and relevant to us. Evil has no place in my life, and I don't provide it room. Or at least I try not to. And given that everything is one, I've made mention elsewhere that in the comments of one of my videos that everything is one, so there really are only friends here. And that's actually something that someone in my past has told me before. And I think that's important to keep in perspective.